Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Joe Everett. I am the producer of the BYU Library Family History webinar series, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I will do my best to address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on April 18th with James Tanner on an inside view of working with the FamilySearch family tree. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant on the source linker on FamilySearch.org, Basics and Beyond. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Kathryn. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Library Family History Center and presents at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with the focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and fresh raspberries. All right, Kathryn, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you. I'll stop sharing and
Perfect. Joe, thank you so much. And hey, I was just looking at the chat and noticed somebody asked if there's a handout. So to answer that question right off, I actually don't give handouts because I tried once and they're out of date 5 minutes after the presentation, but I share links to the slide deck. So I have just put a link to the slide deck in the chat, and please feel free to use that. So let me go ahead and share the screen. Well, everybody, welcome to our webinar today. We're so happy that you could join us. As some of you might be aware, the source linker on FamilySearch recently got a facelift. And so this webinar is going to cover the new version of the source linker. Actually, you can switch back and forth between the two experiences right now. There's a link at the top, but I just did want to be clear about the scope of this webinar, that we're not going to be focusing on the old source linker, but everything will be related to the new one. So here's what we've got on the schedule for today. In case you're not familiar with the source linker, we're going to just kind of do a basic overview of its purpose and its layout, kind of its look and feel, and the basic functions that are available. Then after that, we're going to walk through a couple of examples. We'll start out with a very simple one with just one person on a source that we're going to attach using the source linker. And after that, we will do a one that's a little bit more complicated, but not bad, because it has multiple people on the source. And to be honest, this is the more common scenario, that you will have multiple people on a source. And there are some things that are different when you attach multiple people, or excuse me, attach a source to multiple people, as opposed to just having a source that you attach to one person. And then after that, we're going to get into the beyond portion of the webinar with 6 of the really cool features: view record, show hide information on the source linker, how to detach a source if it's not correct, how to align unmatched names. And these kind of go from simple to complex. So those first 4 are pretty simple, but then we're going to talk about one that's a little bit more complex, changing the focus person and also using the add feature. So let's go ahead and dive in. Our first topic, what is the source linker? Well, essentially, the source linker is a tool available on the FamilySearch website that is used to attach records from FamilySearch historical records to profiles in Family Tree. So here's a visual. Let's say that we have found a source for Elizabeth White. Okay, that wasn't supposed to go quite that fast. Sorry about that. Let's back up a second. We've got a source for Florence Elizabeth White. We found her in FamilySearch historical records in the 1911 census. Well, it's nice that she's in the historical records, but I want to attach this record as a source to Florence's profile in Family Tree. So that's where the source linker comes in. So I bring up the source linker, and there's several ways to do that that we'll be covering in just a minute. And the source linker shows me the source, and it shows me Florence's family tree profile. And so it allows me to attach this source to her. And then once I do that, it shows up in the source list on the sources tab of Florence's page in Family Tree. So that's basically what the source linker does, what its purpose is. At this point, let's bring up another scope note that we said we're talking about the new source linker. And also, because the source linker is only used to attach FamilySearch historical records, we're not going to talk about ways to attach third-party sources, such as maybe you found a military record on Ancestry or a christening record on Find My Past or something. We will not be covering those in this webinar, but there is a separate webinar on those, and these are on third-party sources. So these links right here are live, and I did just at the beginning of this class through that link to the presentation in the chat. And so if you open up the link to the presentation and then you go to this slide, you'll be able to click on these links and get to either the slide deck for it or the webinar recording. Okay, so the Source Thinker is a really cool tool. How do you get to it? There's four different ways that you can get to it when you're working on the FamilySearch.org website. The first and probably the most simple way is that FamilySearch, if it can find historical records that it thinks applies to the person whose page you're on, it lists those records as hints under research help. So if you click one of these hints, that is going to take you to the source linker. Another way to get to it is to click the Family Search logo. And I think this is maybe one of the best kept secrets on a profile page. What happens if you click one of these logos is it doesn't just go to the site, but rather it grabs all the information off the profile page that you're on, and it runs a search for you using that information, which is so cool because then you don't have to type it all in. It just does the search for you. So if you click on, excuse me, if you click on the Family Search logo and it runs this search, then when you see the search results, there's an option there to attach those sources. That opens the source linker. Then third way that you can access the source linker is just to use the regular search. So you're not starting from a person's page here. Instead, you're going to the top menu, you're hitting search, you're entering in whatever information, whatever person you want to search for, and then you click search. And then when you do it, it brings up the list of search results. And when you click on one of these people, there will be a button for attaching the source, and that opens up the source linker. The last way that people often don't think about of how to access the source linker is that if you open up a source that is already on the sources tab of a profile, if everybody in the source has not been attached, there will be a link for unfinished attachments, and clicking that opens the source linker. If everybody's attached, you can still review the attachment. This link always shows up on an attached source. So you just click that, and that also opens the source linker. So those are the four ways that you can get to it. Once you've gotten to it, so let me make this interesting comment. I've been helping people with family history for probably a couple of decades now. Well, Family Tree's only been live since 2012, but I found almost universally with new people who get into the source linker, one of the first comments they make is, I have no clue what I'm looking at. This is like a mass of confusion to me. So if you have felt that way, I wanted to comment that you're not alone. But what we want to do today is kind of explain the layout so that when you get in there, you go, oh, okay, I know what I'm looking at. I know the basic structure, the basic layout. So what the source linker does is in the left-hand column, it puts information from the record that you're considering attaching. So in this example, I am considering attaching the 1939 register in England for this Robert Bainbridge because I think it's probably a good match for this Robert Bainbridge over here. The right-hand column shows you the people from Family Tree. So left-hand column, source information, right-hand column, Family Tree information. And the purpose of that is so that you can compare them and decide if you really want to attach the source or not. Is it really about this person? A few other things that I wanted to highlight about the source linker, and this is a new feature which I absolutely love, only available on the new source linker. Anytime that information, wow, my mouse pad is like being really sensitive. It keeps going forward when I didn't mean it to. Okay, so we're backing up here. What I love about this is often people would use the source linker and they'd look at this and they'd go, wow, the information on the record is better or more complete or more accurate or whatever than what I'm seeing over here in Family Tree. And I really wish I could change it now, update it to this good information. Well, you didn't used to be able to do that. You would just have to take a note and remember to go back in later on. And as for me, half the time I would forget unless I wrote it down. So this was actually FamilySearch developed this as the result of feedback from users who said, wow, I really wish I could fix things right from SourceLinker. So now if any information in Family Tree is different from what's on the source, you get a little different marker here. Now, that doesn't mean the information on the source is always better. Sometimes it is, or more complete. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But what FamilySearch is doing here on the source linker is just saying, hey, there's a difference. You might want to check this out. Well, if you decide that the information is better on the record and you'd like to add it, then FamilySearch has always also made that super easy. There's now an edit icon right here, and you just click it. What it does is open up the same edit screen that you would get on the profile page. So it'll be very familiar to you. You just click the pencil, it opens the screen, you make the edit, you put in a reason statement and save it, and you're back to the source linker to finish attaching the source. Any information on the record which is not already in FamilySearch, in Family Tree, on the profile will have an add button. And we're going to look at some examples of that later on. But that's just to make you aware, you do have the option to just click this button and add this information to the Family Tree person, just as you're attaching the source. Pretty cool, huh? People that FamilySearch can't match to a person on the right, so in other words, a person from Family Tree, these people end up in this Others on Record section. And you notice there's nobody across from them because FamilySearch is saying, okay, this person is on the record, but we're not sure where they fit in the family or even if they are in the family. The cool thing is there are these little handles here. And if you determine that one of these people really is up here, for instance, this Lena right here really is the same person as this Lena, well, then you can just click and hold and drag and drop and put that person from the record across from the right person in Family Tree. And we'll show an example of this later on too. So that is just our basic overview of the source linker. And again, we would invite you, I won't be taking questions during the webinar, but at the very end, we'll be addressing all the questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to jot it down or put it in the chat or Q&A, whatever you would prefer. So let's now walk through a couple of basic examples of attaching a source. We're going to start with the first example of just attaching a source that only has one person on it. So for this example, we're going, remember Lena from the screenshot that we just looked at? Well, we're now on her person page and we are going to attach her civil birth registration, so her government birth registration, which is in FamilySearch historical records. So this is how you would do that. The first thing, since it doesn't show up as a hint, then I'm just going to click the FamilySearch logo. And again, that's going to grab this information and run a search for me in FamilySearch historical records. So these are the search results that come up. And the first source you can see from the little attachment icon, it's the 1911, it's already attached. The 1901 is already attached, but aha, here is the birth registration. And I can tell that it's for her, number one, because of the name. But then another reason is that I actually went to the general register site and double checked to make sure it gives more complete information there. The reason that I'm bringing that up is not to be specific, it's rather to be general, that when you find a source here in the source results, it's always a good idea to just kind of sanity check it and make sure that it really is for your person. So I did my due diligence here. I sanity checked it. I'm satisfied that this source really is for my Lena, and so I want to attach it. So then I can either click her name or I can click the icon here. They take you to exactly the same page, which is a more expanded version of the source. So now you have another opportunity to look. I love how FamilySearch gives us so many opportunities to make sure that we're being careful and accurate. So here we've got more complete information. We see who it's for, what the year is, what the place is, where it's found in the original record, when it took place, all that kind of thing. So I look at this and I say, yep, this is my gal. So I want to click the button to attach this source to Family Tree. When I click that, now this is happening. Okay, what do I mean by this? This drop down is being displayed because I did not start from a record hint. If I had started from a record hint, and we're going to see an example later on, I wouldn't have had to choose the person. But since I didn't, since I just found that record in FamilySearch historical records, FamilySearch is going to ask me, who do you want to attach it to? You notice up here there are a couple of different ways to view potential people to attach the source to. So possible matches, FamilySearch will look for people that probably match this record, but you notice that I've selected my history list. And that seems to work really well for me because most of the time I'm attaching sources to people that are on my history list because I've been working on them. So that just know that you've got the option, and FamilySearch remembers whatever you chose last time. So I am just about always in my history list. So every time I open up, it gives me options from my history list. You can also type an ID or a name in this box right here, and it will filter this drop down to whatever you type. If all else fails and you don't see the right person, you can click this button to search in Family Tree. But our right person showed up, so I'm going to go ahead and click select for Lena to tell FamilySearch, hey, I want to attach this birth registration to Lena in Family Tree. So if necessary, click compare. The reason that I say if necessary is that, again, if you start from a hint, and that's the only place I've observed this, if you start from a hint on a profile page, it kind of clicks the compare button for you and you don't ever even see it. It just expands this comparison place. But in this one, it didn't. And so in order for me to compare and attach the source, I'm going to have to click this button. Then what that does is it expands all this information so that now I can compare it more carefully. I can add things if I want to. I can make any edits that I need to, et cetera, et cetera. So let's walk through what I will actually do in attaching this source to Lena. So I review the items with a different marker. Oh dear, it did it again. Okay, I review the items with a different marker, and as I look at them, both of these items are not as good as what's already in Family Tree. So in this case, I really don't need to edit anything because here her middle initial is just an initial, not the full name. Here the sex is unknown, but here we've got better and more complete information. So no need to do anything here, but at least I evaluated it to see if I needed to make changes. Now, this one, okay, this is Kathryn talking. Now, this is not a family search policy. I'm just giving you, I guess, my best advice on adding things. I You could add a ton of stuff. And this information, like you noticed probably on the other screenshot, there were like 3 or 4 different things that you could add. Is it wise to add all of them? I sometimes question whether it is because they're all going to end up in the other information section of the profile, and sometimes they repeat information that is available elsewhere. So for instance, here, this birth registration, it's going to show up in the sources list, and it's also going to show up as a tagged source on the relevant vital events. So to put it in addition in other information doesn't make sense to me just because it's redundant. Another reason is if you're familiar with English birth registrations, this year is not always accurate. The person could have been born late in the previous year, and the birth could have still been registered in the next year. So putting the birth registration in the other information section can also be misleading to people who maybe aren't familiar with how birth registrations work in England. So my personal choice is not to add this. It's not wrong if you choose to add it. I would say do what you feel is best and what you feel adds useful information. In my experience, residences and occupations are typically the most useful type of other information that you can add via the source linker. And then we've got a little section on tags. You probably are familiar with tags in a general sense, but how do they work in FamilySearch? I've noticed that that's kind of a mystery to a lot of people. Basically, what it does when you tag a source to one of the predefined tags that FamilySearch supplies, then if you go back to the person page and you click on that item, so for instance, here, name, it's tagged to the name. If I go back to the person page, click on name, then this source is going to show up in the source list of the name edit box. If that didn't make a whole lot of sense, we're going to see an example of it later on. Also, I wanted to comment that if the tag you want doesn't show up, you can tag the source manually, and we'll walk through that as well. Because for some reason, and I've actually reported this to FamilySearch, wait, but it hasn't gotten fixed yet, is that, oh dear, I'm on the wrong thing again. Sorry, okay, now I'm lost. There we go. You notice here that there's a tag for the name that has automatically been selected, but this is a birth registration. So why isn't the birth tag here? It should be, but gosh, but it's not. So I'm going to have to go back and manually tag that, but hopefully FamilySearch will get that added at some point. So now we're ready to move to the next screen. The next thing that I wanted to show you is that you do have the option to add this source to your source box. And some people use the source box a lot, some people don't use it at all. So it's really a matter of personal preference. The source is always going to be visible on the person, or if it's been detached, it'll at least be in their change log. But if you like having all your sources that you've ever attached show up in your source box, then you would want to click this every time you attach a source. I feel like I'm hearing somebody's question. I'm actually not even monitoring the questions right now, but I bet somebody is asking source box, what's that? How do you get to that? So if you click your name in the upper right-hand corner of any family search page, one of the options there is source box. And it's just a holding place where people can save sources, either attached or unattached, if they would like to save them there. So that's basically what the source box is. If you'd like more information on that, I would recommend clicking the circled question mark on the top of the family search page, because that's the help button, and then looking up Sourcebox. Okay, and then we're to the point where we want to add a reason statement. I am such a huge fan of reason statements just because they're so helpful in a shared tree. So family tree is a shared tree where we're all working together. And because everybody's contributing, we can't always read each other's minds, right? Okay, we can't ever read each other's minds. So somebody could attach something and they might be very, very clear on why they're attaching it. The information is in their head, but I'm not clear on why they attached it. So, in order to share our thinking processes with other people, it's always a good idea to write a reason statement. They don't have to be long or complicated. They just have to hit the key points. So, take that as a plug for reason statements. That's all I'm going to say about it, except for a couple more plugs. But if you want to know how to write reason statements or how to write an effective one, we've actually got a whole webinar on that. And this is a link right here. So I would recommend checking out that webinar if you'd like to learn more about writing effective reason statements. So once I've written the reason statement, then the last thing to do is click attach. And that attaches the source to the person in family tree. Notice that we're still in source linker. So once you attach the person, it doesn't like make you leave right away. You can still look at it, and especially if there's other people to attach. So here we can see that the background turned green, indicating that this source has been attached. And now compare is no longer relevant because we have already done our comparison. So this button changed to detach, just in case I or somebody comes along and says, oh, wait, that source is not about this person. We need to detach it, get rid of it because it's going to confuse people. It's not the right source. Okay, so how do you get back to the person's page? If you're like me, you have too many tabs open. I always have like a bazillion tabs open. So I try to like get rid of tabs I don't need as much as possible, tabs in my browser. You might think that a good way to get back to Lena Marianne Wilson's page is to click this button, but guess what? If you do, it's going to open up another tab up here with her in it. So what we really want to do is we want to close the source linker tab because we're done with that. We still have this tab open. You probably remember the record screen where it gave us details on the record. Family Tree opened that in another tab. Well, we're done with that, so we can close this. And here is the first tab that we started with. So we don't really need to click this one to open up another tab with Lena in it. Instead, we just shut this one down, and then we will be returned to the original one where we can see the source that we've added. So speaking of going to Lena's record, let's talk about how we can tag that source we just added to the birth, since birth was not an option. So you probably recognize this is a close-up of the vitals section on Lena's profile page. Next to birth, there is an edit icon. I'm going to click edit, and it's going to show me the information here so far and all the tagged sources. Well, guess what? The source that we just added, that birth registration, doesn't show in the list because the tag was not there. We couldn't add the tag. So let's go do that. The way that you add a tag, if it was not available in SourceLinker, is you go to the person's profile page and then you click the Sources tab, and then you find the source that you want to tag and you click to expand it. When you expand it, it gets a gray background and you'll notice there's a tag section. The name is already there. We remember we saw that in the source linker, but nothing else is. So we have the option to add a tag. So I'm going to click this and it pops up this little screen here with 6 predefined tags. Well, the one I want is birth. So I'm going to click birth and then I'm going to click save. And after I do that, birth does show up as a tag in the source. And then if I go back to the edit screen for birth, now the source shows up because I tagged it. So that is an illustration. If that, the verbal explanation before didn't quite make sense, here's the illustration of the effect that tagging has when you tag a source to whatever it may be, a name, a birth, a death, whatever, doesn't matter. It will show up in the relevant place, a relevant event that you tagged it to. But I said I warned you that there were going to be more plugs for reason statements. So as I look at this, I see the reason statement is totally blank. And I have a great opportunity here to add a reason statement. So, and I don't believe in like long, detailed, like things, reason statements that take you 5 hours to write. Most people are not going to do that, right? But I do think it's very helpful to explain why you think the information is correct. Well, I believe this birth is correct because I found it in the civil registration of her birth, and I found her birthplace in these censuses. So that, at least in a shared tree, that gives people enough information that if they want to look into it further, they know what sources to look at for that information. So once I've added my simple reason statement, I click Save and the source is attached. So now we are ready to move on to attaching multiple people on a record. We're not going to walk through this one in quite as much detail. Rather, I'm going to show what's different in attaching a record with multiple people as opposed to attaching a record with just one person. So for this example, we are going to attach this 1901 census source that came up as a hint for Robert. And at censuses, as probably a lot of you are aware, almost always have more than one person on them. It's really the exception to only have one person in the household. So we can pretty much expect that we're going to see Robert and some family members on this census. So let's go ahead and click the record hint. And when we do that, this is a relatively new feature, which I absolutely love. So a little preview of the record that you're thinking of attaching is going to show up on the right-hand side of the profile page. So now you can just kind of scan through this and say, okay, does this look like the right person? I scroll down, do the family members match, do the dates and the locations, just a quick sanity check. Does it look good? Well, yeah, this is an exact match actually. So I'm going to go ahead and click Review and Attach, and it brings up the source linker. There are two things that I wanted to point out here. Because we started from Robert's profile page, this is what I was talking about, where it kind of clicks the select button for you, and we just don't even see the select button for Robert. It knows, because Family Tree knows, because I started from his page, that I want to attach the source to him. So it just expands his information. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Amazing Family Search has done its best to match every person on the record with the appropriate person in Family tree. So we've got the dad matched to the dad, we've got mom matched to the mom, and the siblings matched to the siblings. In fact, I think I have a little, yeah, I have little outlines for it. So this shows the expanded information for Robert that was done automatically. And then we've got the names matched as best FamilySearch can to the relevant people in the tree. I would say in my experience that these are about 98% accurate. Once in a while, I find, for instance, a second wife on the record attached or proposed as an attachment to a first wife, and they're not the same person. So you do have to just kind of do a little sanity checking. But again, most of the time, these are going to be correct. So that is a great feature that makes it so easy to attach a census to the whole family at once. So here is another thing I wanted to point out. It, this is a new feature, and I actually sent some feedback on this suggesting that they take this off, and you'll see why in a minute. Now, on any source that has a marital status, they will give you the option to add that marital status. But to the point we talked about earlier, marital status is already indicated by sources. So this is redundant, but also when it gets added to the other information section, this is what it looks like. Custom event, marital status, single. And another one from a different reference, marital status, married. No source, no date. And the other thing that is potentially confusing is this is right across from the residence. So somebody could potentially and understandably conclude that Robert was single in the 1901 and married in the 1911, but that's actually not the case. He got married, as I recall, in 1913. So he's actually single in both these censuses. So not only is this confusing, but it's redundant of what's in the sources. So as a user, I would just much rather look at the marriage source and at the family relationships in the family section rather than having this kind of, questionable information here that just kind of clutters the screen. Again, that is just my opinion. There's nothing wrong with adding this if you feel that that adds value. So I do feel that the residence adds value because you'll get that nice list of residents in the other information section. So I clicked the green plus sign to add the residence, and then I also add a reason statement here and then click attach. As we saw before, once the source is attached, the background turns green, but I'm still here in the source linker, and now I can very easily attach this source to all the other family members. So let's click compare for the mom, and her section opens up, but notice what happens here. FamilySearch assumes that since I'm attaching people from the same record, that the reason statement is going to be similar, if not identical. So it remembers the reason statement that I put on Robert and it populates it into here. I don't even have to retype it. Now, sometimes the reason statements aren't going to be the same. A good example is a christening. So if there's a christening and two parents on a christening record, there's a baby and two parents, then the reason for attaching the source to the baby who got christened is different than the reason for attaching the parents, because the parents didn't get christened. In the reason statement for the baby getting christened, I say something about the christening, but in the parent, the reason we're attaching the source to the parent is because it proves the relationship to the child who got christened. Well, if you need to change that reason statement, it's editable. So if it's right, you just accept it and click attach. If it's not right, just edit it to however you want it to be and then click attach. So you can see FamilySearch made it super, super easy to attach relevant sources, to give good reasons, to add all this information like residences and occupations that we might not have been able to add before very easily. So That is just, I can't say enough how much I love the source linker because I don't know if any of you all use the old system that was called ironically new.familysearch.org. But back in the old days, attaching a source was so much harder and so much more complicated. Family Search has done everything they can to make this as intuitive and simple as possible. So we've just walked through those two examples. Let's now look at those bells and whistles that make the experience even better and give us even more flexibility and functionality in using the source linker. So the first one that I love is the ability to easily view the record right in SourceLinker. So in this example, I am trying to attach a marriage registration for Walter Wilson. You notice that the information that comes into SourceLinker about this marriage registration is very sparse. All I've got is his name and his sex is unknown. So, but I remember when I looked at the full record page, there was a lot more information there. And especially often when I'm writing a reason statement, I want to see the information, the more complete information from the record. Well, Family Search to the rescue, there is a View Record button, and when you click View Record, it opens up this panel on the side without leaving SourceLinker, so you can see this more complete information. And then when you don't want to look at it anymore, as I recall, shoot, I should have tested this, but as I recall, you can click View Record again. I believe it's a toggle and it will make this disappear. Now, if you want to go to the full page view, you can click View Record here and it will take you to the full page. Another thing that is very helpful is the ability to show and hide information right on the source linker. You can open and close groups and you can open and close individual information. So why would you want to close something? Well, it can be helpful if the page is looking really cluttered and you want to kind of declutter things a little bit. Opening is helpful if you don't see something you expected to see. So, for example, over here, the children's section is closed. Well, in this case, there are 0 children. But if there were children, I would need to click open to open up this section. In fact, let's look at the difference between groups and individuals on the next couple of slides. So in the source linker, the information is categorized into groups. We've got parents at the top, then we've got the main person and we're going to talk about this later on. We often call this the focus person. Then we've got that person's children and that person's siblings as well. So we've got the SourceLinker is divided into groups based on the different relationships to the focus or the main person. And each of those groups can be closed or open. And this is just a toggle. So if it says close and you click it, it's going to close it and then the option will change to open. And then if you click open, it expands and the option changes to close. Kind of typical for how these kinds of expandable, collapsible things work on many different websites. So that is how you expand and collapse groups. Let's look at how you can expand and collapse people because it's a little bit different and I would say even a little bit more complex. So if a person's information is open, like Mary's is here, we can see all the stuff on the record, all the stuff on her, then there will be a close option. And when you close it, it will collapse it so that it's just this like narrow band here, like for Joseph or like for Robert. But here is where it gets a little bit more um, maybe unexpected. Maybe that's the right word. If a person's information is collapsed or closed, as Joseph's is here, if, if there is a compare button, you can click that compare button and it will open or expand his section, and it will include options for attaching the source. But sometimes the compare button is not there, as in this example down here where we've already compared and attached. So then if you want to see or expand that person, you have to click details. When you click details, it does not give you the option to change anything. So you can't add anything, you can't do a reason statement, you don't have an attach button. If you click details, all it's going to do is open up the bare bones details that are associated with that record or with that person in family tree, excuse me. So I hope that makes sense. If it does not, please ask a question and we'll address that at the end of the webinar. How do you detach a source if the source is not really for that person? So in this example, we have a source for an Esther Michaels being attached to Emily Esther Michael. But what do you notice about the parents? The names are totally different, aren't they? And also, if we were to drill down to the birthplace is also totally different as well. So somebody saw this name and jumped to the conclusion that it was probably the same as this Emily Esther over here, but turns out it wasn't. So we need to detach this source. Well, it's super simple. But before we get into that, I wanted to address a point that always seems to come up in working in a shared tree. When people will ask, is it really okay for me to detach a source that was attached by someone else? Well, in a shared tree, the answer is absolutely yes, because all of us are working together to make Family Tree the best that it can be. So the important thing is not really who attached the source, but whether the source is accurate. Is it really for the person that it's attached to? In this case, it's not. So whether or not I was the person who attached it, it's totally fine for me to detach it since I know that it's wrong. So how do you do that? As you might expect, you click detach. How's that for stating the obvious? Then you'll get this little pop-up screen and it will ask you to explain why you're detaching the source. Again, this is super important because what if the person who attached it comes back later and says, "Hey, wait, where's that source? Why is it gone?" And they look in the change log, well, they're going to see your explanation of why you detached the source. Again, I believe in keeping reason statements very simple. So I just want to hit the high points of why these two women cannot possibly be the same. So Emily Esther Michael, that's her full name, which is different. She was born in 1901, but she's born in Grainthorpe, Lincolnshire, and these are her parents. On the other hand, Esther Michaels on the record, she was born in 1901, but she was born in England, and her parents are Abraham and Rachel. So that's how I know that this source does not apply to Emily Esther Michael. So once I've written the reason statement, I click detach and the source is detached. But here's a little caveat. You've noticed as we've looked at Source Linker that you can add information. Remember those green circled plus marks. You can add information to the profile that ends up in the other information section. If you have added, let's say you added a residence or the person who attached this wrong source added a residence when they attached the source in Source Linker. That residence ended up in the other information section, but when you detach the source, it does not delete that wrong residence. So you have to go back to the other information section and actually manually delete that incorrect residence that was attached as part of that wrong source being attached. I hope that makes sense, but again, please ask a question if it doesn't. Okay, here is the promised review of aligning unmatched names. So you remember we mentioned that if FamilySearch cannot determine who a person on the record matches, it will just put them at the bottom in an Others on Record section. But because of my research, I know that Walter Wilson married Mary Alderson, and she's with him in this 1939 source. So this Mary A. Wilson on the source is this Mary Agnes Alderson. And so I want to attach the source to her. Well, super easy. You just click on this, click and hold on this little icon and drag the source up and drop it right across from Mary Agnes. And that's what it looks like when you drop it. The compare button appears, and then you're able to compare and attach that source. Okay, we are down to the last two items, and these I saved the more complicated or trickier ones for the last. So hang on with me here and just know that we are recording this webinar. So if you hear the explanation and go, oh my goodness, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that, just know that you can come back to the recording and listen to it again. So earlier we talked about the principle of a focus person. And basically, that's just the person that you originally intended to attach the source to. So in this example, I am wanting to attach a marriage record, and I started from a record hint on William Leaf Coney's person page. So I clicked it, got here to the source linker, and because I started from him, he is the quote focus person. Why does that matter? What's the big deal about that? Well, everybody else in the source linker is shown in relation to the focus person. Otherwise, you've just got this blob of names on the screen, and it can be very hard to make sense of. But notice that FamilySearch, so William's our focus person. Now FamilySearch can identify George as William's father. Same thing over here. Identifies Anne as his mother, identifies Isabella as his wife. Well, we have to have some reference point, right, in order to identify the relationships of the other. So that's the value of having a focus person. It allows you to make sense of all the other relationships that are listed on the record. Well, we've got a little issue here because John Moncaster or Moncaster is down in the bottom in kind of that miscellaneous section where FamilySearch isn't sure what to do with him. Well, as we look at the people that are showing in the source linker, John isn't one of them. So we can't drag John to a person because he's not showing up. Well, probably you've noticed that he's got the same last name as the bride. So this is very obviously going to be Isabella's dad because this is a marriage record and they list parents of the bride and groom on the marriage record. But because we're on William, our focus is on William, we only see his immediate family. We see his dad, we see his mom. If he had children, we could see them here. He does have some siblings, but they're collapsed. If we were to open this, we'd see his siblings, but John doesn't fall in any of those categories. He is Isabella's dad. So in order to see Isabella's relatives, we have to change the focus to Isabella, and that will display her dad, and then we'll be able to attach the source. So let's walk through how we do that. Above William, oh, I think I forgot to mention that the focus person always has this blue bar above them. That's one way to identify who is the focus person. So there's an option on the focus person bar to change the person. And so we want to put the focus on Isabella. So we're going to click change person and we get this drop down that is showing us all the relatives of William, including his wife. So we click Isabella because we want to be able to view her relatives. And when we do that, look what happens. Now that she's the focus person, William is listed as her spouse, and her parents are shown at the top now rather than William's parents. And FamilySearch was smart enough to realize that this John on the record is the John on in Family Tree, the father of Isabella. So now we can click compare and we can attach this source to John. And you can change the focus person as often as you need to get to the right people. Another time I use this is like if there's a niece or a nephew living with a family in a census or an in-law or something like that. And also, another point I wanted to make was that if you have attached a record to somebody, changing the focus person does not change that attachment. So once it's attached, it's just attached. And you can change the focus person however you need to get to the right people. Okay, we are now ready to talk about the last option, which is the ability to add a person to Family Tree from the source linker. So you can add people from the source linker, but is it a good idea? Let's look at a couple of examples. This, just to be very quick about this, I was kind of excited when I saw this, but I've learned from experience, or sorry, I should say what this is. I was kind of excited when I saw that there was a child that I hadn't previously known about that I could potentially add to Family Tree. But I've had enough experience with adding people from SourceLinker where there's almost no context to know that I better check this out before I blindly just click add. Well, it turns out that Lily isn't Lily at all. She's actually Elizabeth, according to her birth registration and according to the earlier census. My guess is that on the very original record, they had written Lizzie. Now, I'm not talking about the image in like FamilySearch or Ancestry. Just a little tidbit here. I was really surprised to learn this when somebody told me. But since this is about census records, and since all of us work with censuses so much, you'll probably be interested to know that the original records that the enumerator took are usually not what we actually see when we look at the image. Very often, that is a copy because you can imagine the poor enumerators going around, is he on horseback or he's walking on a sweaty day? And the paper that he's writing at is probably just a mess by the time he gets done with it. So very often when the enumerator turned in his original copies, somebody else would copy those, make a nice clean copy. But sometimes errors got put in there. So my theory, I don't know this for sure because I don't have access to that very original enumerator copy, is it probably said Lizzie instead of Lily, but somehow it got, excuse me, got transcribed or got indicated as Lily. And so now she's showing up as needing to be added as Lily. But if I had done that without checking on like who she really was, I would have created a fake person. So like, because she's not really Lily, or if Elizabeth was already in Family Tree, adding Lily would really create a duplicate of Elizabeth because she's really Elizabeth, if that makes sense. And I apologize if that is a little bit of a convoluted explanation, but the main point that I'm hoping you'll take away from this is that you can't just blindly click add and trust that it's just going to be right. Because a lot of times there's just things that you need to sanity check, like in a census. The birth years are just estimates. Sometimes the birthplaces are wrong or the relationships are wrong. Censuses are notoriously unreliable. They're a wonderful tool, but they do have a lot of errors in them. Let me show you another example here. And by the way, just to give you a little sneak peek of the final conclusion, I'm not saying don't ever add people from SourceLinker. Our final point is going to be just do the due diligence and be careful. So here is another example where I was actually working on my family and discovered that there were a couple of duplicates in Family Tree. Well, come to find out, these duplicates had been added from one of those projects where people were just adding people from the census based on only one census. Never a good idea because they're the information may not be reliable. It's just always smart to check a few sources if you can. So these duplicates were added based just on the census, but the reason I bet that they weren't caught is because both these women were added under their married surname, which FamilySearch has asked us not to do. We're supposed to enter women. If women live in a culture where they change their surname upon marriage, we're asked to use their birth or maiden surname to avoid confusion. But in the 1911 census, as it happens, Harriet was married, going by her married name, and so was her daughter Annie. So Harriet's real maiden surname was actually Hellowell, and Annie's maiden surname was Crowther because she's Harriet's daughter. So both of those gals were already in Family Tree, so I had to merge the two people. But then here is the additional challenge. For some reason, when those names were added from the census, Annie's husband and son were not added. So it looked like I could add Tom. So I clicked the add button just to see what would happen, and no duplicate warning came up. But guess what? I did a separate search and Tom was already in Family Tree. So and I want to be really clear here that the problem is not with SourceLinker. SourceLinker is an amazing tool. The issue is with the quality of the data. SourceLinker can only use the data that it has, right? So does that mean never click the add button? No, of course it doesn't. You can click the add button, but you'll have a lot better success if you follow these best practices. Only add people from the source linker if you've already verified their basic information in other sources, like another census or a birth record or something like that. And you will save yourself the hassle or somebody else of merging duplicates if you just do a quick search to make sure they're not already in Family Tree. Sometimes SourceLinker will flag the duplicates, but if the duplicate if the information quality is not the best or it's not as complete as one might hope, then sometimes those duplicates are not found. And so I sometimes on the internet, I see people recommending projects, and I've seen various ones. So I don't want you to think that I'm trying to, you know, criticize anybody, because there are at least three different projects that I'm aware of where people are doing this, where with the best of intentions, they've said, hey, it's so easy to add people to Family Tree. Just find any census. In one place, they were even saying you don't even have to be related to the person. Just find a census and add all the names to Family Tree. Well, that's a really good way to add a lot of duplicates and a lot of errors. So I would say avoid projects where you just add people from the source linker with no verification. If you want to participate in those projects, at least do the verification, and you'll be really glad that you did. And the other people in Family Tree will also be glad that you were careful, that you didn't add duplicates or questionable records with, errors in birthplaces or anything else like that. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Just by way of review, we talked about how the amazing Source Linker lets us attach sources from FamilySearch historical records. We walked through a couple of examples where we had one person on a record and multiple people, and then we looked at each of these features on the Source Linker. So thank you very much for attending. And Joe, do we have any questions that we need to address?
Yeah, we have just a few. So one of the questions was if you see the unfinished attachments notation and it is for unrelated people, is it best to dismiss it?
Oh, that is a super good question. I am so glad you asked. So I didn't even think to mention that. So the issue with dismissing it is it dismisses it for everybody. So if you can put up with having that little notice in your source list, I would say don't dismiss it, because it is going to benefit somebody somewhere who is related to that person. Great question. Thank you for asking.
Okay, this one's a little more of a comment than a question. Um, Someone was just noting that in the fan chart view of Family Search, um, when it color codes uh, the places of birth,
Yeah.
there's a different color for England than for United Kingdom.
Yes.
And let's see here. The person was noticing that, like in your examples that you showed,
Yeah.
um, that you had like Lancaster, Durham, England, for example. Um, let's see if I'm reading this right. But then that same place with United Kingdom at the end of it is also standard. So both are standard with or
Yeah.
without the United Kingdom at the end.
And
So
actually, oh, sorry, Joe.
yeah, I guess it's just that's kind of the comment, and I guess the question is like, do you have any comments about that? Maybe why it's set up that way,
Yes.
or any recommendations about?
y- I sure do.
Yeah.
So, Family Search, right or wrong, I'm not going to argue for the correctness or the historicity of it, but for whatever reason, prior to about 900 AD, they do not, and Joe, you might be able to comment on this because of your expertise in family history. So, according to Family Search, England did not become part of the United Kingdom, did not exist until about 900 AD. Now, if you Google this, you're going to get different people's opinions. But in the Family Search sources, about, and I don't remember the exact day, I apologize, but it's about 900 AD. Prior to that time, you're not going to have United Kingdom. After that time, you are going to have United Kingdom. But it even gets messier. So a lot of the records that were added back in the old systems, like in new.familysearch.org or even in the IGI, they didn't use the same standards. So a lot of those records, even if they were after the creation of the United Kingdom, they would not have the word United Kingdom in the place name. So that's why they show up different on the fan chart. The fan chart just evaluates what the place name is and it colors it accordingly. As far as I know, it doesn't look at dates or anything. It just looks at what's in that place name. So if you go back to the profile page and you correct that place name, then it will show up correctly in the fan chart. And I shouldn't necessarily always say correct either. If you change the place name, then it will show up differently in the fan chart. Does that make sense? Please ask a follow-up question if it doesn't.
Okay. My personal feeling on that, if I have a lot of British ancestors,
Mm.
is I personally prefer to not put the United Kingdom on the end of it, just because I like to see it color coding differently for Scotland versus England or
Ah,
Wales, um, rather than having them, be brought together, even though
under the
those are
UK.
all countries within a country now.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. I actually hadn't thought of that, but that's a really good point that would, because UK shows up as one color on the fan chart and the others show up as others. Thank you.
All right.
Any other
Yeah.
question?
The next question is, how do I attach a source that does not have reason statement box and therefore does not have the attach button?
I don't know if could you give us a little more information on that? I actually don't recall ever seeing a source that doesn't, not a family search source, that doesn't allow me to specify a reason statement and attach it. So I think I need a little more detail to answer that
Hmm.
question.
What may be happening is you might be seeing a situation where something has already been attached.
Ah.
It's not really clear that that's the case, and so there's no attach button because it's already attached. I don't know.
Oh,
That's
now if
just,
that's, yeah, that's a good theory, Joe. If that's the case, then if there's a reason, if the reason statement wasn't added at the time that the source was attached, let me just go back to oh shoot. You know what? It might take too long to find it. I'll just describe it. Do you remember when we showed the picture of when you click the edit button for like a birth or a name or something like that on the profile page. And if there's no reason statement, you can put the reason statement there by clicking that edit button. So I hope that helps answer that question. But if it doesn't, please ask a follow-up question.
Okay. The next one is referring to when you were working, or you were showing an example of Lily, and the question was, how did you check Lily and find her birth registration? Was she actually part of the family?
Oh, good question. So, in English birth registrations, especially on the GRO site, for those of you, and I hope this is relevant to people. I know a lot of us do have English ancestry, which is why I feel comfortable going into a little bit of detail. On the General Register Office site, where the birth registrations are indexed, it will show the mother's maiden name, and it also shows the registration district where they were registered. And so I knew from the census approximately when Lily was born. I knew her mother's maiden name and I knew the registration district. So I went back and searched for any Bainbridge, like didn't put in the name Lily, any Bainbridge born within a certain period of time, registered in the Lancaster district, and Elizabeth was the only one that came up. And then I checked the earlier census, the 1891, as I recall. Shoot, I don't remember. It was either the 1891 or the yeah, I think we were looking at the 1901, right? Where she was Lily. So in the earlier census, she was called Elizabeth. So, and when I clicked on Lily, no record hints came up for her in, okay, you know what? I have to take that back. When I clicked on Lily in Ancestry, hints came up, but they were all clearly for a different woman. And so like she had different parents and was from a different place and so forth. And so the fact that Lily was, as I believe, misrecorded in that census actually it was a potential for confusion. And the records I knew I could rely on listed her as Elizabeth. Gordon, if that doesn't help, please ask a follow-up question.
Okay. Just another person commented that, yeah, the place name, whether it's England or United Kingdom, is just based on the date. And
Oh, I was way off.
she says 1800 rather than
I said
1900, by the way. Yeah.
900, sorry. Yeah, if it's 1800, I was way off and I apologize. And I did mention that, like, when I Googled this, I got a lot of different answers as to when the UK really came into existence. So
Mhm.
thank you for that comment.
All right. And then one more question, and that is when I attach a record hint and add to the title of the source, does it cause a problem for the Family Search algorithm?
Oh,
Um,
that's a good question. It does not cause a problem for the algorithm because once it's attached, see, the system knows internally what the right information is. So if you edit that title, it doesn't mess anything up. But I did ask a Family Search manager, and he says occasionally they will refresh those titles. So if you have edited the title and they refresh it, your changes will be lost. So that's just something to consider.
okay, and there's actually a two-parter on that one. So the next part is it important to add the same source from Family Search as often as it comes up as a hint?
Oh, that is another very good question. Thank you. Back when Robert Kerr was over search at Family Search, some of you have probably heard him talk at Roots Tech, amazing guy. He answered that question. He said that he said basically the answer is yes. You should attach every Family Search source that is really for that person, even if it appears to be a duplicate. Because sometimes the source, like for instance, in the United States, one source might be at the county level and one source might be at the state level. And they might look like they're duplicates, but they actually contain a little bit of different information. And they actually came from different sources. Another example would be English. Christening records. One might be the original, one might be a copy called a bishop's transcript, and they might be different or they might be the same. The one thing he said, so basically, yes, please attach all those sources. But the one thing that he mentioned that you definitely don't want to do is to mark the source as not being for the person. Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I just realized I got recent information about this that just contradicts what I said. Joe, how are we on time? Do we have time for me to display something in Family Search, or
Well,
shall I just describe it?
we are over the time, so
We
you can be
are.
still
We're
with
like
us.
we're
And
like
it's
way
only
over.
because they still want to be with us. So,
Thank you, people. Why don't I just describe it rather than
okay,
showing it? And
yeah, I
then
think
if
that'd be
you
best.
want to, yeah, if somebody wants to, let me throw my email in the chat and you can email me for more information. So I've got to be quiet while I type because otherwise I'll type my email wrong. Okay. Okay. But here is the new thing about Family Search that I apologize contradicts what I just told you. So just ignore it. Maybe Olivia can edit out the wrong part. Now, if you see a duplicate source and it's absolutely a duplicate, you click the not a match button. Kind of counterintuitive, right? But when you get in there, there's a bunch of check boxes, and one of the check boxes is duplicate. So you click the duplicate, and then that sends a message to Family Search that you've marked it as a duplicate source. And you might notice now that every once in a while in your source lists, you might open up a source and you see a message and it says, Family Search has retired this source. We recommend using the most current version. And so in that case, you would you detach the source because Family Search has asked you to, and you know that it's not the most current version anymore. So that's how they're dealing with duplicates now, is you report them as not a match and click the duplicate checkbox.
Okay. Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you to everyone who's attended. There's several thank yous posted in the Q&A and chat as
Oh,
well. Um, we
thank you.
hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which is on April 18th with James Tanner on an inside view of working with the Family Search Family Tree. A recording of this webinar with Catherine will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. And if you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at the email that is on your screen, um, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And thank you, and have a wonderful week.